Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Castro Valley Unified School District Special Board Meeting. I will call this meeting to order, and I will take roll call. Vice President Lee.
Here.
Trustee Theodore.
Here.
Trustee Howard.
Here.
Trustee Loss.
Present.
All trustees are present and accounted for. Thank you. The next item is approval of the agenda. And have there been any changes to the agenda?
Yes, personnel doc has been amended.
Thank you. This
Move
is an
approval of the agenda as amended.
Thank you, Gary.
I'll second.
The motion's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0. At this point in time, prior to us closing to closed session, we will take any public comments regarding closed session items. And the board respects and encourages the public to comment on matters on the board agenda and within the board's jurisdiction. The board fully supports civil discourse and requests that everyone respect each other and their point of view. Individuals who wish to speak must address the board by raising your hand during the start of the agenda item. To comment by video conference, click the raise your hand button, and to comment by phone, raise your hand by pressing *9. To request to speak when public comment is being taken on the eligible agenda item. You will then be unmuted during your turn and allowed to make public comments. After the allotted time, you will then be remuted. Individual speakers are asked to limit their comments to no more than 3 minutes. There are up to 30 minutes of public comment allowed on each agenda item. With board consensus, the president may increase or decrease the time allowed. This meeting is being recorded to prepare the official minutes. Seeing that I have no raised hands on items on the closed agenda, I will recess us to closed session and we will return to open session at 4:30. Thank you, and we will see you then. We will be starting our board workshop momentarily. We were just waiting for one more person to join us. Thank you.
Parveen's in the attendees area.
Amy, if you could move Superintendent Amati over to the panelist, that would be great.
Got it.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining the Castro Valley Unified School District Special Board Workshop on our budget. And with that, we are reconvening to open session from closed session, and to let you know that we did not make any decisions in closed session. We will move on to item 4, action and discussion items, and we will request approval of the personnel report, and this is a revised personnel report, and this is an action item.
I'll move approval of the revised personnel report.
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Now we will move, Parveen?
No, go ahead.
Now we will move on to our budget priorities workshop. Over to you, Parveen.
Yeah, thank you. Before we get started, I think you are noticing that we actually have captions, live captions. And I just want to ask everyone to be patient. I want to thank the community member who reminded us that actually Zoom has live caption, but there are times where the captions are not exactly matching what is said. And I know that Amy spends a lot of time when we don't have live captions to make sure that it's accurate and it's respectful. Sometimes it doesn't come out that way. So I just want to make sure that folks understand that, you know, we don't have the ability to do that right now, but it is live caption. So with that, let me go to, let's see. Let's go to the slide presentation. We're excited about today's presentation. I want to thank Susie for working really hard we talked a lot about, you know, what can we do to give you and the community a really nice overview with details, enough details so that people can understand how budget is set and budget priorities are. And then of course, time for you to ask any clarifying questions and then hear from the community and then have a discussion. So next slide. I think it's, I really wanted to kind of start us off by talking about the fact that our budget really tells it all. Tells anyone looking at our budget should be able to see what our priorities are. And as you know, when you ask people's priorities, and I always say it, so show me the money and I can kind of see where the priorities are. So our goal is always in investing in our students' future. And I think what I have seen, this is my 6th year here, and I have never seen any of you waver on that. And I think it's really important for us to remember that, and this community working together to make sure that that's our priority. Next slide. So I wanted to make sure that we kind of ground ourselves tonight in where do we get our priorities, right? So that alignment is really, really important. It's key to getting where we want to be. So basically our priorities are outlined in number 1, our strategic plan, which we really follow to a T. When we look at our strategic plan, any decision that we make, we have to look at our strategic plan and see if it's a match. It's also our local control accountability plan that is required by law. It is also our board and superintendent goals that we set. They're all aligned. Next slide. So this is our strategic plan. And I think anyone looking at our strategic plan, obviously you can also see the enlarged version on our website, really about our vision and mission, and then our priorities that we want our students to graduate from high school, prepared for college and career. We want every 3rd grader to be able to read at or above grade level. Every student will be supported to meet or exceed grade level expectations, so whatever standards we have in grade levels, and all students will have access and use to technology, which we are doing a lot more as we move forward, to be able to collaborate, communicate, and also maximize learning opportunities for all grade levels. And obviously, as we talk about, I think it's really important to remember our core values, that we believe that we are all responsible for students' growth and achievement, and that we want to nurture their gifts. We also have really all of our work grounded on equity and leveling the playing field for our students to be able to make sure that we are able to do what we actually have as our vision and mission. Next slide. So our LCAP goals, and I kind of just paraphrased here, all students graduate college and career ready. You see the alignment already. Through culturally responsive and rigorous curriculum, safe and positive learning environment with highly qualified staff, adequate materials and appropriate facilities, and that parents are empowered and engaged in students' education. Again, all aligned with our strategic plan and what's required by law for the local control accountability plan. Next slide. And of course, our goals for this year, each and every child in CVUSD is provided the best learning opportunities in order for students to reach their highest potential. The other one is successfully navigating through challenges related to COVID. And you will see that in our, as we think about our budget this year, in order to support students, staff, and families, ensuring fiscal solvency. That's huge for us. And you can see why it's so important. As we talked about at our last board workshop, we talked about our cash flow, we talked about deferrals, and then obviously advocating for public education and CVUSD internally and externally. And that's because That advocacy is what gives us the funding. That advocacy is what supports our work statewide and locally. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Chan, who is going to go through some slides. I think since it's a pretty involved and long presentation, if you have questions as she goes through the slides, or actually if you have any questions of me at this point, you can go ahead and ask them. And then at the end of the presentation, we again ask if you have any clarifying questions in general, and then we'll listen to the comments from the community and then back to your discussion. So any questions so far? If not, let's go to the next slide with Ms. Chan.
Thank you, Ms. Amadi. So a basics of school district budget.
Sorry, I didn't see, before Susie, I didn't see Dot raise her hand, but she has a question or comment. Go ahead,
I
Dot.
did see Shane in the attendees. Does he need to be pulled in?
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Dot. Shane, welcome to the meeting.
Hi,
And
thank you.
Susie, please proceed.
Okay, so this slide, Ms. Amadi already kind of covered a couple of the bullet points here. I'm just going to cover the two that we didn't cover yet. So basics of school district budget, as you know, our budget should represent estimates of income and revenue and the maximum expenditures authorized by the board. And so that is when we take it to when you approve a budget in June for the new year, and also any changes that happen. The last bullet there rely on projections and amount of funding. Obviously, it's not certain until the state or the governor approves the state budget, and that is actually when we take it to you, back to you, the approved budget, the district's approved budget to you for any type of revisions based on the enacted budget. Next slide. So this is what our 2021 general budget looks like, general fund budget looks like. So this is looking at the revenue and expenditures. As you can see, it shows you the breakdown of where the money is coming from in terms of revenue. So the bulk of the money that we get is the LCFF, or what we call local control funding formula. That's $82 million or 82.6 million. That represents 80% of our revenue. And then we do get money, 3% from federal, 16% from other state funding, and as well as local funding. So that is where we get all of our revenue. Again, LCFF is the bulk of the money that we get for funding the general fund budget. The expenditures, looking at this at the bottom there, or the big pie there, is really our salaries and benefits, and that represents 85% of our spending. And then we'll cover that. We have a few slides that I'm going to share with you in terms of what that looks like in salaries and benefits. Then you have services that represents 11%, books and supplies for 3%, and other outgo for 1%. Next slide. So we wanted to really unpack for you the factors, what's in the budget. And what are the factors impacting the budget. And so a lot of these, we have slides and that we will cover. So we'll start on, from enrollment. We'll have contribution to, our retirement contribution, as well as special ed and other information for you. So if we go to the next slide. So we'll start with enrollment versus ADA. So this is actually a really good information to share. We started from 2010-11, and just to kind of give you, a really, a good number of years where you'll see our enrollment If you look at 10-11 year, our enrollment that year was 8,995, and our ADA at the bottom of that is 8,738. And so if you can just kind of follow along from 10-11, we were growing, and then there were some years that we had a decline. And so you'll note it's noticeable in 18-19, we went from 9352 down to 9299 in terms of enrollment. And then we did go back up last year in 19-20, we went to from 9257 to 9321. So this year, this is, Castro Valley is not alone in this area. I mean, as far as declining enrollment, this is a statewide. California, surrounding districts are experiencing this. I know that a school district a few miles away from us, same size district, our decline from last year to this year is about 111, which represents about 1.2%. For that district, the same size, it's actually close to 300 kids that they lost in 1 year. So just wanted to kind of show, give you an example of, what all districts are facing, not just Castro Valley. In terms of ADA, you see that highlighted there is held harmless. And what that is because of the pandemic, Governor Newsom gave us, we are able to use the same ADA as a prior year. So he's holding us harmless, knowing that the decline in enrollment will impact school districts in terms of funding. So we are able to, that's the reason why in 19-20, if you look at that ADA, 8,977, it's the same ADA that we are going to report in 2021, which is the current year, 8,977. And so we're, again, held harmless, even though our enrollment went down by 111 students as of Census Day, which was the first Wednesday in October. I do want to highlight at the bottom there, average attendance rate for us is between 96 to 97%, which is pretty high compared to other districts that maybe their attendance rate might be 95% below. So ours, we are within.
Two comments, so Gary and then Monica. Sorry to cut you short, Susie. I just wanted to make sure that they knew that they were being called on.
I just wanted to ask, where did they go? I mean, if every district has lost all these kids, did California have a massive exodus of people or something in the last year? Is that what it is? Because we've actually lost now. We were at 9,300 there for a long time. And so we're down, what's that? Almost 400 kids or something? 300 kids.
Yeah.
100 kids is $1 million. So it's quite a difference.
Yeah, it really varies. I know that when we looked at our enrollment this year from last year, enrollment from when the data that we started all the way to Census Day, that the number of students that we lost, a majority of them did go to private schools, and then some did go to out of state, so out of California.
Yeah, so I know when Susie is presenting, at times we're gonna jump in back and forth. So just like Susie said, private school, but we're also finding that some families cannot afford to live here because they lost jobs and they moved out of state, or they even moved to another town. That's because it could also be that families are now working from home if they work for the tech industry, and they may have moved to somewhere else. And they're still working, but they're in another school district. But all California is in declining enrollment in general.
Thank you. Monica and then Joe.
Yeah, I have the same question as Gary, is where are they going? Is it declines in birth rates, or is it people actually leaving or kids going to private school? Because if everybody's experiencing it, all of California, it seems like maybe it's more than just COVID, it's a decline in population or something.
It's all, honestly, what I'm hearing, it's all of the above. And when we do our what's it called? Susie, remind me.
Our enrollment projections.
Enrollment projections, you know, when we do our study, that will tell us as well. So it's all of the above. And sometimes people tell us where they're going, sometimes they don't.
Joe?
I think this is kind of a unique situation that happens in education, that we're funded on ADA versus enrollment. And so maybe Susie or Parveen, could you take 1 minute to explain what the difference is between ADA and enrollment? Because I'm not sure everybody who is visiting tonight realizes that we don't get paid for the students that come to school. I mean, that are enrolled at school.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big deal. I can't remember, maybe Susie can remind us when this changed. A while back, many years back, we were actually funded based on enrollment. And that, just that one change is millions of dollars every year for everybody, because now it's based on attendance, which I think is fair, because the goal is to get students. And that's why last year when we were talking with our Revenue Enhancement Committee, we kept talking about if we can increase our, not enrollment, but our attendance by 0.5, it's like $750,000. Something like that. So Susie, you can.
Yeah, so I actually don't remember the year. But yeah, I want to say it's about 15 years ago, about 15 or more years ago, that the state changed it from enrollment. So now we are funded based on average daily attendance. And that's why this chart is really important. Though our enrollment is at 9,210 this year, we're only funded at 8,977, and that's because it's attendance. Okay, no other question on this one. We'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so another important chart slide here is the unduplicated pupil count. This is, we are getting a major component, I should say, of the LCFF calculation is the unduplicated pupil percentage. And so it's based on the number of students that are eligible for free and reduced meals, EL students, foster, or homeless. So that is where the numbers are coming from. As far as looking at 13-14, we were at 2,488. And then if you look at all the way down to last year, we went, our count was 2,619, and it actually goes down all the way to 2,093 this year because of as well, same thing with enrollment that I mentioned earlier. Districts are also experiencing a decline in unduplicated pupil count because of you know, the COVID students are not present, and so in addition to that, students are not in school. As well as the USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, gave us a waiver, all districts in California, a waiver to provide free meals to all students. And so this waiver is really, there's an impact to us because families are not completing the free and reduced meals. And so that's why this count is down from 2,619 to 2,093.
And Susie, from the unduplicated pupil count, are students counted multiple times in particular areas, or is it only one time?
That's a good question. They are only counted once. If they fall in that category of free and reduced and EL, they're only counted once. And so oh, go ahead, sorry. Sorry, and funding is actually, we do get for every student or, you know, unduplicated count, we get an additional funding from the state, and that is what we call supplemental funding.
And then in relation to the last question with population decline or enrollment decline, is there a higher percentage of unduplicated pupils than the
Yes.
rest of the population that are declining enrollment?
Correct. So our decline in enrollment is 1.2. This is actually a 20% decline for us.
Thank you.
So-
I thought.
Really, if you think about it, it's multifaceted, right? When the economy crashes, and especially this time, right? The most vulnerable people are at the most disadvantage. They're the ones that actually have lost more jobs than anybody else. In addition, I look at this and it's our EL population. And remember, there are restrictions about who gets to come into the country. So we don't have as many families moving into America. That also impacts it in general. The other piece that Susie was talking about is it's really, even when we're required to do the, for people to fill out the application for free and reduced, there are a lot of cultural issues that come into play, and it's really difficult. We try to get everybody, it's confidential to fill it out, but sometimes it's really hard for folks to actually fill out the application and say that they need help. And in this case, nobody has to fill it out. So there's no reason for anybody to fill it out. So we try to get them to fill it out. But since we don't need it, and everybody knows that we are serving and we should be serving everybody during this time, that's, you know, that's hugely impacting it.
Thank you, Parveen. Joe?
I just want to point out too, that this is a significant feature in every school district's budget. And it's one of the things that makes it really hard to compare one district's budget to another district's budget. It's apples and oranges depending on what the school district's unduplicated count is. And so it's a little bit inside the budget for us as we look at our neighboring districts.
Thank you, Joe. Back to you, Susie.
That's a really good point, because our duplicated count, it's about 26%, between 26 and 29% the few years, and now it's down. We, for districts our size, with that unduplicated percentage, we get about 20% in terms of LCFF, supplemental funds, 20% added to us. But for a district that may have a higher unduplicated count, let's say it's 55% or higher, they get 50%. And so that is kind of the threshold. So districts like us, like I said, is 20%. For other districts that have a big or huge number of unduplicated count, they do get a lot more, and that's why they get supplemental. And what you probably heard is concentration grant.
And Susie, Gary had his hand raised.
Yeah, I was just wondering, you know, do we actually know where for instance, the high school students went in this? Because I mean, we have to keep track of them for our graduation rate. And this probably, a lot of them will be high school kids. Are we trying to track those kids? They're on our checkbook, so to speak.
So tracking is in terms of the unduplicated count or enrollment?
No, once they're enrolled, we're responsible for their education and for their graduation from high school.
Sure.
Once they start as a freshman, they're on our books, and we have to know where they went. And this is a reasonably big loss of kids. Some of, this is going to double if we don't know where they went, it could significantly affect our graduation rate. So, I mean, I assume that Blaine is figuring out where they are and probably knows it.
Yeah.
That might help us here.
Yeah, not necessarily Blaine, that's not some, I mean, he knows, but we actually have that data. This presentation doesn't include that, but we could actually give that information to you later, because that's about enrollment and all of that. We could do that. Because that could be a whole different topic, but it's related to this, as you said, and we do know where they're going. It's not like for some of them, we do. And you're absolutely right. One of the things that we always struggle with is that graduation rate. Okay, they started with us, but if they don't tell us, right? And we always have that, those issues to kind of tackle. But we'll get you information on where we think they went. As much information as we can get. I'm sure Nick can get that in working with Jason and Susie.
Okay, I'll move on to the next slide. So in the previous slide, factors impacting our budget. So we talked about enrollment, AD versus ADA, as well as unduplicated pupil count. Now we'll go to compensation increase. This is just a reminder of the compensation increase we've given to employees since 2012-13. I also included what we actually received from the state in terms of this COLA, which is cost of living adjustment. And so looking at 12-13, a 1% increase plus a 1.2% bonus. Though we received a 3.24% COLA, and that year the state applied a deficit of negative 22.27%. And then if you could move, we move on to a few years down where you see 18-19, 3.25%. Increased compensation, increase plus 500 health and welfare. We receive a COLA of 3.7. This, in the current year, it's 0 for both. Our statute COLA is 0 because we're flat funded this year, and compensation increase is 0. So looking at the total, a 21.2% since 2012-13 versus a statutory COLA of 15.2%. So next slide. So in terms of class sizes and caseloads, this is in our contract. This is also a reminder for us. Our grades K-3 is at 25:1 class size. And then if you look at grade 4-5, 32. This is a typo here. Grade 6-12 is the same, 33:1. I just had another line there for 9-12, but it's from 6-12 is 33:1. Also wanted to just highlight for you counselors, the case counselors for 6-8 is 450:1. 9-12 is 425:1, and Redwood, because of the students that are in really in need of assistance, the class size there or caseload is 275:1.
Monica does have a question.
What's the ratio with our elementary school counselors?
Good question. Is Sherry, do you?
We have
Have that.
social workers. We actually don't have the counselors listed in the contract. Those are additional positions that have always been a priority. And we have social workers.
Gary?
So what are the normal numbers? I mean, normal, what are the average numbers? What would other districts have? Or do we have more counselors per students than others or less, or how do we fit in?
In prior years, when I actually looked at the data, our numbers were good. Our ratio was much higher. Some districts were as high as 700:1 for secondary. I would not speak to an exact comparison right now because I haven't done the research in the last year or so. But I believe in general, our numbers are pretty good.
And most school districts,
Social workers, because it's been such a priority for us.
yeah, and most school districts do not have elementary counselors or social workers. And those have been really again, going back to alignment with our strategic plan and LCAP and our goals, that was a decision that you very purposefully made because we knew that we really needed counselors and social workers in elementary school. And most of those funds came in. Also, you know, our Title I schools have more services from them, from those of those services than other schools, but we do have them in elementary school. So
Joe had her hand raised. Go ahead, Joe.
Well, I just wanted to comment that I'm aware statewide of many schools that don't have counselors at all. But also I remember when we were making cuts that the community told us that they wanted elementary counselors and elementary social workers. So when we were doing the budget, we took the community's needs and requests into consideration.
mhm. As far as class sizes though, to Mr. Howard's question, I would think Sherry would know better, but I would think that we're in line with districts like ours. Sometimes their K3 is higher than ours. That's what I remember. And then of course there are districts that are basic aid that have less students than us because they have a ton of money. But I have seen 26, 28 in K2, K3 in some districts.
All right, back to you, Susie.
Okay, next slide. So in the next few slides, we're actually, we have the staffing by site and department. So if you go to the next slide. So the first slide here, I know there's a lot of numbers here. So, but really this is our, which is, we wanted to share with you where all the positions, the staffing, FTE, you know, a full-time equivalent, that's what FTE means. So from top to bottom, you'll see the, all the sites listed from elementary all the way to the high school. And then from left to right, what we did is really separate admin, which is a yellow lines there, and then we have the certificated. So if you wanted to just really look at, you know, by site, like a good example would be Castro Valley, our elementary, the number of students they have there in terms of enrollment, admin, and then their certificated staff based on their enrollment. If we go to the next slide, this is where you'll see classified staff. So same thing if you follow CVE in terms of, you know, clerical office staff, and then also their special ed, as well as facilities, so buildings and grounds, and all of that. So this is really what we wanted to share with you, what that looks like at every single school. And then on the next slide, we have the department staffing. This is, you will see preschool as well as adult school, and also the departments. So when it comes to like the CFA, the superintendent's office, all the way to human resources, our HR department. So you'll see, once again, what we did is we separated these by admin, which is in yellow there, and then certificated, as well as the next couple of slides are the classified staffing. So if you have any specific questions about the 4 or 5 slides that we showed you.
This is a lot of information that Susie and her team and Trisha had to put together. I really have not seen this kind of thing in other districts, because basically you can see exactly where what we are funding at each of our sites and departments and schools.
Okay, if no questions, then we'll move us to the next slide. Okay, so in terms of what's considered or what's not considered classroom, we talked about, you know, counselors, libraries. So just to kind of give you information about what's considered in our budget as classroom and what's considered not classroom. So these are the list of different positions that we have in our district that we don't consider really classroom. They're outside, but they are positions that are really important for because based on on our student needs. So it's to support instruction. So from library, we mentioned social workers there, nurses, school safety, that are campus monitors, as well as the lighting, heating, cooling, and also the constructing and equipping the classroom. And the next slide.
This is just to jump in. This is not our definition of not considered classroom,
Yeah.
but this is when we have to turn in our budget when they talk about classroom and instruction.
Right. Yes, thank you. And then the other non-instructional spending, transportation, and then admin functions. And in the budget, as Ms. Amadi explained, what's counted as instructional or classroom spending is the student activities in sports, as well as coaches' salaries. Okay. And then the next slide. So we have programs that we have in place, or services that are supporting instruction. Once again, we mentioned the counselors and social workers in elementary that districts, a lot of districts don't have. This is really unique to our district. We have the wellness center. And we have a really nice building that you all haven't seen, and we're preparing a video to share with you and the public. We have the wellness center. We have 4 CTE pathways, and so they're listed there, as well as we have the MTSS district-wide. And then the last couple of bullet points there, we have the PBIS as well as mariachi program. So I know that a lot of the districts surrounding us may have a few of these, but for us, really, this is unique to Castro Valley because this is, really supporting our students, supporting instruction, as well as staff.
And then Susie, initially, I can't recall if it was a social worker or counselor, but some of that initial funding did come from the Castro Valley Education Foundation to support that.
We had about $15,000 from
great.
the Ed Foundation to start the one counselor at the high school for career education. But we have how many, Sherry or Susie, how many counselors do we have in elementary? Because we have 9 schools. I believe we have 5.
5, yeah.
Yeah. 5 counselors, and then at the high school we have, Sherry, 6 or 7.
5 counselors. We have a career counselor, that makes 6, and we have some social workers.
Okay. And then next slide. So this is a chart that you've seen before, and this is, again, it's here because it's one of the things that's impacting our budget. It's, it's under benefits. So if you look at salaries and benefits, this is included in that section. So CalSTRS and CalPERS, this is contributions over time. So from 13-14, this is the, if you look at the rate, 8.25% for CalSTRS and CalPERS at 11.44%. That was actually the last year we had that rate, and we knew at that time that it was actually going to increase. Prior to that, it was the same. It's about 8.25%. Really, 13-14 was the last year until we started putting more contributions to fund the unfunded liability for CalSTRS and CalPERS. So if you look at how that the change, the increase really from $4.8 million all the way to the current year, 2021, $12.2 million for both CalSTRS and CalPERS. If you just look at the rates at the bottom, you can really see how it's grown from 8.25% CalSTRS all the way to 16.15% in the current year. CalSTRS at 11.44%, and now it's 20.7%. Okay.
Aka, you have a question?
No, I was just thinking for the people that are listening, you might want to define what CalSTRS and CalPERS are, because
Oh, yes.
some of the
Yeah.
people who are listening probably don't have any idea what that is.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for reminding me. Yes, so these CalSTRS and CalPERS are pension contribution to our employees. Our employees do put in their contribution. This is the district contribution only. This does not, again, doesn't include the employee contribution. This is only employer contribution. Again, it's pension. CalSTRS is for our certificated employees. And CalPERS is for our classified employees that are working and putting into or eligible for this pension.
So for certificated, the contribution certificated used to put in was 8 point something, and it's gone up by about 2%.
It's for 9%.
9%, so about 1%. So that increase was much smaller than the contribution the district is putting in, is basically twice as much.
Yes, and then for classified, which is the CalPERS, the contribution stayed the same. It's 7% of their salary. Okay.
Oh, before you go forward, Susie, Gary had his hand up. Go ahead, Gary.
So those contributions there look sort of flat right now. Is that going to stay flat?
Yeah, so they looks flat from last year, or actually started, if you look at 18-19, it went up to 12 million to 19-20 to 2021. And that is, the reason for that is because the state, our governor, put in money towards this contribution to help school districts, especially in 2021, in the current year. Part of his enacted budget is to kind of level off the rate for the districts. So we're not seeing an increase, but it's only for 2 years. So we're only seeing that in 2021 and 21-22. Then it goes back up in the third year.
And that's a part of our projections in our multi-year projections and budget. I was going to say, remember one of the first slides, we talked about our goals as a board and superintendent about advocacy, and actually it should be all of us working together, community. That advocacy is what really pushed from all the school districts and all these different organizations, pushed the governor to say, we just can't do this unless you give us some, some relief. So we have to continue our advocacy.
Okay, next slide. So we talked about salaries and benefits. And so now this is it's just one slide, a breakdown of non-personnel costs. I'm sure you are all wondering where that 15% is going. As mentioned in the previous slide, 85% of our budget goes to salaries and benefits. What happened to the 15%? And so this is really just a breakdown of where it goes. So just kind of highlighting a few, just a few of them, but then feel free if you have any questions. So debt service, that's our payment on an annual basis, and that's about close to $400,000. We also have supplies and materials there, as well as translation services and transportation. That transportation budget there is for our special ed students. And so I'm actually I have another slide for special ed, so that I'll cover in the next few slides. If you have any questions about this breakdown, anything we need to unpack, okay. Next slide.
The acronyms NPS and NPA, non-public school.
Yes, thank you. Non-public school, non-public agency, yes. Okay, next slide. Okay, so now we have a couple of slides here for special ed. So in the other slide that I shared with you, I mentioned I listed special ed because our special ed program needs local assistance. And in this case, we're looking at a 19.5 million expenditures in our special ed program. So looking at how much we get from federal, not that much. It's $1.5 million, which represents about 8% of our expenditures. And then we have the state. So we receive a state grant also for our special ed. It's $8.8 million. That's 45%. Take a look at the other side there, which is the contribution. Contribution is $9.2 million, or 47% of the expenditures is coming from contribution. Contribution.
Susie, sorry to cut you off, but Dot has her hand raised.
Remember there was that one board meeting where there were a whole bunch of people complaining about the special ed legal team that we use, and we had asked, or I don't remember how many people asked, but I know I had asked to get more information about how much we spend on special ed legal issues. How much of the cost that we spend in special ed legal fees, what percent of that is that of the total special ed budget? So
I don't have the spreadsheet with me, but I do know when we looked at did a comparison of the legal, it's about $300,000 to $400,000 out of the $19.5 million.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I think it's really important when we talk about that, that is not, that we're required at times to be engaged in conversations that require us to have it. But one of the things I always think about when I look at special education expenditures, I think it's really important that we say the idea, the Individual Disabilities Education Act, is there for a reason, right? These are our students. These are our students who need additional support. So when I think in a lot of districts, when they talk about the funding that the general education actually adds to cover the cost, and calling it a different name than a contribution, I think we've been very purposeful in saying it's a contribution. And because I often hear encroachment. Well, these are the same students we have. They are our students, and we have to have programs for them to support them. I know I keep thinking about what the cost, actually the additional cost is, versus what it actually costs to serve 10% of our students who have special needs.
So, I mean, we're underfunded already in general with everything, but for special education, we're deeply underfunded. I mean, we wouldn't have to contribute, additionally if we were funded properly for special education. And for that proper funding, where would it be coming from if we actually got it?
So one of the things that I do want to mention, and thank you, Lavender, for that question. In the past, you probably have seen, you've seen this slide. It was hovering about, a 52% contribution. And so looking at this year's 47%, and that is the reason why it went down slightly is because of the money that the state, the governor increased the AB 602 funding. So that is actually really good news for us, because what he, and this is what we reported before, where AB 602 said there are some SELPA districts that are getting per pupil of $900, compared to us, we're getting about $450 per student. while others are getting 900 per student. And so this is part of the, what they're trying to increase our funding, but obviously it's not enough. But what we get, what we receive, we are, we're grateful for because of that. And you can see in the contribution, it did go down slightly because of that.
But in general, Susie, what are we supposed to get from the federal government?
In general, we are supposed to get at least between 25 to 35%. And so not this 8%, $1.5 million that we received from federal.
Thank you. Joe had her hand raised. Joe?
I was holding up 4 fingers because the initial promise was 40% from the feds.
Thank you, Joe. Back to you, Susie.
Okay, so I have another slide, special ed here. So if we can go to that one. Okay, so in terms of staffing, special ed, so $19.5 million, that's, you're probably wondering, in terms of staffing, what does that look like? This just a list of, positions that we have that are supporting our students, from teachers all the way down to, other classified employees, as well as clerical, and also the transportation drivers that we have. For other contracted services, these are specialized services. I've listed them here, educationally related mental health services, translation services, music enrichment, occupational therapy, services, non-public school agencies that we mentioned earlier. So just to give you a sense of what that looks like as far as the number of students, special ed students that we have, looking at that $19.5 million and dividing it by the number of students, special ed students that we have, we're spending an average of $23,325 per student, special ed student. And if we look at our general fund budget for our gen ed student, our gen ed spending is $10,000 per student. So just to show you how much more we're spending for our special ed students and also versus our gen ed student spending.
So this is the part that we want to advocate for, because these are services we should be providing for our students. This is what they need, and this is what we must be providing. And morally, we want to and we need to continue. Our question isn't about why we're providing them. Our question is always with the state and the federal government, help us do this right. Give us the funding that we're supposed to get from you.
With the new administration, have you heard anything about any potential changes yet to the education secretary, or what that might look like come down the pike at all? No. Okay.
No, because it's always kind of, even in previous administration, it's never been a priority. And I can tell you that every year when we were allowed to travel, I didn't get to participate, but many times different organizations would go and meet with the budget folks in Washington. We never got anything really a positive response.
Thank you. Back to you, Susie.
Okay, next slide. Okay, so you've seen, from time to time, we report to you grants and that we received. We wanted to share with you a list of all the grants that we received the last few years. So these are resources that help pay for instructional priorities. So if you can go to the next slide. And so looking at all of these grants, these are not the same as the ones that we automatically receive from federal and state. These are ones that we actually do need to apply for. We do all the reporting. We go through a really long process to get funding. And this is, just a good list of them. Local Solutions Grant, that really involved a lot of folks, including human resources, working collaboratively with our special ed department as well as ed services to try to get this funding. So $342,000, and the term is from 2018 to 2023. So, and we listed there what the position is funding, and also any other, whether it's position or services that it's funding. We thought it'd be a good idea to just really share with you all of the things that we're always looking out for grants, and if we are eligible, we go out for every single one of them. Unfortunately, there are some that we don't get, and we're very, we want to make sure for the next round we do a really good job in putting together our application. And so this a good list, including the next slide. If you can go to the next slide, just to show you what we received, and looking at the list, $3.9 million. And this is just a, go ahead.
Sorry, Susie, I know a while we had talked about some grants that you had gotten for clean air vehicles. Does this include this as well?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So under facilities at the bottom, if you look at Carl Moyer, we actually did receive a couple of them. This one is listed here, which is the second one on that list, Carl Moyer, air quality for bus for pupil transportation, and it's about $96,000, as well as the California Clean Energy Jobs Act, which is almost $2 million, and the CTE for our engineering and architectural building, $2.9 million. So again, that's close to $5 million in terms of facilities. And then up above is $3.9 million, and that's services and positions that funded.
Yeah. Definitely very unfortunate that we have to seek grants because we're not funded correctly in the first place.
Yes.
And I think it's amazing the amount of work that your team has done in such a short period of time to get, I mean, if I add that correctly in my head without thinking too quickly, it's almost $9 million. So, to be able to get that amount of money in such a short amount of time just shows the effort that you have made to contribute to the budget. So thank you so much. And so thank you for your team, Susie.
Yeah, it's a team effort. It's not just my department, it's ed services. A lot of time is being spent there. It's human resources as well as the superintendent's office. And of course, working alongside our principals as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Joe has her hand raised. Joe?
And Susie, I just wanted to point out the cooperation of the school district with the ROP.
Yes.
Because quite a bit of this money is something that you've been able to do working with the Regional Occupational Center.
Yes, thank you. Yes, they are actually listed there, the CPT1 and CPT2 in the previous slide. We do partner with our regional occupational program, and on an annual basis, we do get whether it's these type of grants or our CTE. We do work closely with them. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, just a couple of things. I think that's, so when those grants come up, you have an option of applying on your own. And we have always really decided to work with ROP together because it makes, and it's all 4 districts, and it's extremely collaborative. It's based on ADA, and I just, that's a really, really awesome partnership. The other thing I wanted to say is there were grants that we were hoping to get this year from a couple of places. And the conversation, and we did all the paperwork, and then we got back something that says, because of COVID, we're rethinking things. And, but I have to say, I do want to really thank Sutter, because the other 2 were also local. We had one that we had applied for Kaiser, and another one with the foundation, Aiton Foundation, and we were told they won't do that this year. But I want to thank Sutter for coming through both years and supporting us in so many different ways, Aiton Hospital. The other thing that I don't think we've listed here, we just got is $30,000 from Fremont Bank.
Yeah, that's not listed. Yes. Okay. Next slide.
And we thought this was really important for everybody to see, because oftentimes when we talk about budget cuts and budgets, people say, well, you should be applying for grants. And it's really sometimes frustrating when they say that, like, have you asked Google for a grant? You have to know that it's really difficult to apply for these grants. And we basically apply for anything that we can find. So, you know, again, thanks to staff for doing all that work to get grants. So we're always looking. So if you have an idea and if you know of a grant that we haven't seen, please let us know.
And then Dot had her hand raised. Dot?
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge also that often grants come with a lot of administrative burden. So there's, as much as the funding can benefit our students and community, we have to recognize that that is the other side of it. You know, and that isn't always thought through. You know, when we talk about, hey, just get these grants, get these grants. So we have to think about our administrative staff and how much work they have to do to make sure that the details in the grants are met.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that, because we were actually talking about that today about a grant, and we're like, well, with every one of these comes a lot of, you know, work that we have to do. In addition, a lot of them actually ask for match, and that is another difficulty. But thank you for mentioning that.
Okay. So we've added this slide just to really highlight a lot of the things that we've done. I know, with the pandemic, it's just really the focus is on technology, right? So this is, preparing the district for the 20th century student. And so we've been really, this is a plan that's been really in place the last few years prior to COVID. And so, when COVID happened, right? So what we looked at is, what can we provide to our students? What have we done in terms of our internet bandwidth, our software, what is available to our students as well as our staff. And so just kind of highlighting any upgrades that we've done, I also included there Measure G. That's important for us to remember that part of the work that Sharon, our facilities director, and Greg, our technology director, is working on is really the upgrade that's funded by Measure G, and that's upgrading all of our network switches and access points. This is really important for us to showcase, right? 9,100 Chromebooks deployed to all students. That's a lot. That's, it's, and the reason for it's 9,100 is because some of our families chose to use their own devices. And so they opted out of this program. So, but that's 9,100. That is really worth noting, because our technologies department's been ahead of the game. Basically, we've bought all of the devices that we needed to purchase to make sure that for this new fiscal year, we had enough for every single one of our students.
Yeah, a couple of things. I think you should really be, I'm grateful that you included technology and really focused on it as we were talking about Measure G, because it's not something that people necessarily see. It's inside walls, it's all of these things, but that upgrading the network switches and access points and all of the hardware was really critical with Measure G funds. So I'm glad we did that. I also wanted to say I was really happily surprised to see, because sometimes you hear, well, they're not using their Chromebooks, but that over 75%, I believe, of our families who actually took the survey, which was almost half of our families who took the survey, said that they actually use the Chromebook. So happy to hear that it's going to good use.
Monica has her hand raised, and then I have a comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, from everything I've read, everybody on the staff and the superintendent is to be commended. We were way ahead on this because you still read how a lot of districts do not have enough Chromebooks for their students. And so there's that real technology gap that's really creating a learning gap for students. I just thought it would be interesting to know how many MiFi devices we handed out in addition to the Chromebooks. I know there were some students who don't have internet that we had to support with the MiFis.
Yes. So the MiFis, we do have about 250 out, or issued. We issued 250. Prior to COVID, we were about 30, 50 MiFis. So we did go up to 200, about 250 this year.
That was going to be my question, Monica. My other question, Parveen, is when you're looking at Alameda County and you're talking to other superintendents and their preparation and what they had available, in comparison in general, how were we compared to other districts when COVID did hit with technology?
Yeah, I think there were districts that were about the same place or ahead of us because of funding. So like, it's really hard to compare. You know, we talked about the supplemental funds. It's hard to compare Piedmont that has a $5,000 parcel tax versus Newark. So I know that as Trustee Lee mentioned, you constantly hear about big districts that are really having a hard time actually making sure that their students, each one of them has. So I think we're in a really good place. I have to say, especially this year, getting all this in and into the students' hands. When I talk to people around the state, they do commend us for making sure that when I say we have provided every student Chromebook, unless they, you know, didn't want it. But so it's really, we're in really good shape. I also think that's why I mentioned the Measure G, because I think we could have given everybody a laptop or a Chromebook. But if our internet and all of that isn't working, it really is an issue. Like yesterday, the internet went down. I know that Greg is getting gray hair by the day, but that's because we work with other entities. So it was actually, we found out it was either, we kept saying it's either AT&T or the county, because our internet goes through the county. That's how we get our internet, is working with them. Well, we found out, I think it was a fiber optic wire in a wall at the county. So, but just that kind of could have paralyzed us. But I have to say, I am so thrilled. I sent a text to all of our administrators and say, great leadership, because immediately they had emailed the families or used Parent Square, which thank you, Amy, for putting it in place. So they were telling parents what's going on. Some of our teachers who work on site then went back home and taught. Some of us had to move into different locations and actually go home to work because we just couldn't get internet. Again, we are in such a better shape than we were like 4 years ago because of all that work that's been done.
Okay, next slide. So we've covered a lot of the factors that are impacting the budget, from salaries to contribution to technology. So our CBB process, wanted to just again bring this back, because we're at the point, again, it's November, that we have already started thinking about this, and we will be bringing this back to you in the spring to review. So CBB or zero-based budget is based on board's direction, goals, and strategic plan. This is same slide or previous slide, we talked about that. It ensures that the priorities are addressed in the budget. What we do as in terms of this process is re-examining all positions, the allocation formulas based on contracts. Shared with you that slide, and consideration given to both enrollment and need. Other allotment that we also look at, besides personnel, is discretionary school use, so which is your supplies, instructional materials. as well as all of the necessary things. So essential to run the school or the district, which is your operating costs. We're looking at utilities, your insurance, your financial system, as well as office supplies. So next slide. So as part of our ZBB process, we always look at efficiency, and most of the time that equates to savings. And so just highlighting for you the services or programs that we are achieving an annual savings. In-house transportation, we brought that in-house. So we are saving between $300,000 to $400,000 a year for that. We brought in in-house landscaping services, and that is, kudos to our, maintenance and operations department, and that's about $30,000 annual or savings, as well as reduce costs of utilities. Always looking at, what are solar panels that we have district-wide. And so, since we've installed those, solar panels, we've really seen a reduction in our utilities, and that's about $300,000 to $500,000. And then in terms of process changes, so when we look at things like, shipping costs that, it's per box, per ship, per parcel. We look at, we always look for ways to save money. And so if there's a membership that we can, participate or sign up for, and that is, activating that membership that I've listed there. It's about $50,000 change or reduction in terms of the shipping costs, as well as, we terminate contracts that are not that we can do in-house also. So that's and as well as preventive maintenance. You've heard Mr. Krebs, our director of maintenance and operations, present to you a couple of years now of his plan, and it's it's really just doing preventive maintenance work that in the long run saves us a lot of money, as well as.
Before you continue, I know Dot had her hand up. I want to give her a chance to speak. Sorry.
I hear this a lot from people in the community, or I hear this question: are we saving any money on utilities or wear and tear or anything with students not being on campus right now?
Yeah, so good question. Yes, so we are saving a little bit of money, right? So it's really not, what we look at, maybe 50% or not. It's not that much because we still have staff, right? They are still on campus working. We're at the district office. Every single one of us are here. And so we are using the utilities. So we are seeing a slight change, but it's really not a considerable amount. And then the last bullet there is the elimination of the contribution to Fund 13, with the exception, obviously, because of COVID. Last year, we did make a contribution to Fund 13, but prior to that, we've eliminated that contribution, and it's not in our multi-year. We don't have any plans to make a contribution to the Child Nutrition Fund. And so that is, an annual savings that we call, because in the past, we have put in between $300,000 to $500,000 each year to help the Child Nutrition Fund. And then we go to the next slide.
Before you go to the next slide, I think I just have to say it as a superintendent that I'm so grateful to the team that I work with, and Susie leading this charge of where can we save. She's always looking, they're always looking for ways to save. Where do we cut costs? And I just want to thank you for really thinking out of the box all the time.
Thank you. And then so This is the budget development process, zero-based budget development process. This is, you haven't seen this before. We prepared this just to show you from start to finish what that looks like. It's not just when we take the zero-based budget, you know, the ZBB of spreadsheets. That's not the only time we actually review them. It's a long process. It's almost a year, really. So we wanted to share with you, you know, between the modeling and reporting, which is this month, right? So we have budget priorities. This is a workshop that we are just sharing with you what our what's in our budget, right? And then what comes after that, as well as revenue updates that we've shared with you. We look at our LCFF, actual enrollment. So we will be certifying our enrollment in December, and so we'll update, you know, there's an update on that, and that means we will need to update our revenue, our multi-year projections. And then, of course, then the governor's proposed budget that comes in January, and then may revise and so on. In terms of sites and departments, this is what they do. So this is what happens at that site level. Ed Services will meet with the principals on priorities. They review the template, they develop the site, you know, and department budget, and then they will be given a template, and then we'll have conversations, and you collaborate with Ed Services as well as other principals to look at, you know, the priorities, to look at staffing. What do they need? What can what can be eliminated, right? And then Human Resources, which is our HR department, looks at enrollment and staffing, and also works with closely with our Student Services Director in determining the enrollment and any reductions in the new year. Of course, you know, business services, every month we do have work that needs to be done in terms of updating the budget, looking at enrollment projections, meeting with the principals, reviewing and preparing for the ZBB spreadsheets for your review. And then, of course, prior to that is we review it in cabinet to make our recommendation. And then next slide. Okay, so just keeping the district, you know, this is a lot of good points here. A checkoff list, probably a lot of people will say, keeping the district in sound financial condition. You know, district should have enough cash on hand to pay current bills and those and those that are due shortly, right? So we've done a presentation on cash flow and all the deferrals. And so we want to make sure that we do have enough on hand to pay our bills. We have sufficient revenue that supports expenditures and ongoing, you know, on an ongoing basis with, you know, not a whole lot of reliance on our savings. You know, if you know, district should be able to meet long-term debt obligations, and that's making sure that's in our multi-year, because that is actually what our creditors look at, making sure that we are planning for our expenses, upcoming expenses, not just in the current year, but also in the multi-year, so to maintain our good credit rating. And then a few of those, you know, provide educational services that meets the needs of our students. We maintain our buildings. That's very important, because if we don't maintain our buildings, then it will be costly, right? So when we try to repair or you know, major renovation that comes up, we do want to make sure that all of the state and the federal claims are submitted timely and accurately. And so we make sure that we have enough time to process those before we send those out. And also another important thing here is the audit firm. So we do engage with our audit firms regularly. They come in at least 3 or 4 times a year. They go to the district office, talk to department heads, as well as they go to the sites to review their records, whether it's attendance or you know, ASB, all of that. And then, of course, then reporting the district's financial status to the board. So in the next slide, this is looking at all of that, including where we are in the current, not just in the current year, but the next 2 years. We always, as part of the ZBB process too, is what I mentioned earlier is the mitigation and cost reduction. If we know within the if that our revenue will be either flat or we're not getting COLA, and that's what we've experienced when last year, as that we knew in the 2021 year, which is the current year, that it was either a reduction or flat funding. So what we do on a regular basis, we really look at the budget and we present it to you, and then recommendations of some type of reduction. And so just to highlight 18-19, we did cut our budget by $1.2 million, and so I provided the description there of the reductions. In 19-20, which is just last year, it's about $600,000. And then in 2021, we have 3 items there that I wanted to just remind you. $1 million we've cut through the ZBB process. And again, just looking at making sure that our sites and department budgets are staffing is tightened, and if there's any way we can, if there are opportunities for us to transfer positions from unrestricted to restricted programs, just so we can maximize those restricted programs to help the unrestricted general fund. The $800,000 there is we reduced the textbook adoption set aside, as well as a $1.2 million reduction in from admin to support staff. We also tightened staffing and eliminated some unfilled classified positions. So that's just the last 3 years, a $4.8 million reduction. Okay, and the next slide. Okay, so why is that all important? It's important because we are required to certify our budget. And so you have 3 different certifications here. We have a positive certification, which is the district will meet its financial obligation for not just the current year, but also the 2 subsequent fiscal years. And so since I've been here, it's always been a positive certification. And so we're in a really good place. So I know that, we always get information or report from other entities like School Services of California, CASBO, or including AXA, of districts that are not doing well. So if we can go, not doing well. There may be either qualified or negative, and you probably have heard of them. And so I just wanted to share with you what that looks like. So for a qualified district, it means that they may not meet their financial obligations for the current year or 2 subsequent fiscal years. So what happens to them? The ACOE, their local county, is required by law to take action necessary to ensure the district meets its financial obligation, which means operations will be impacted. They can't sell bonds except through the county board of supervisors. The county has the ability to suspend the issuing of warrants, and that could be paychecks, could be checks to pay our bills, and also can restrict some of the district's authority. And then, of course, then the lowest here is the budget certification is negative. And we know of a couple of districts around this area that have been in this situation where they were unable to meet their financial obligations. So the state took over and they imposed revisions to the budget, as well as they stayed and rescinded any actions inconsistent with the revisions of the budget. So again, just putting that into in context as far as budget certification, why it's important to have a positive and to get out if you're out, if you're unqualified, to make sure that you have a plan to go back to a positive certification. Okay, and then I believe that's my last slide before, board questions. If you have
So
any
if
more.
you, I know you've been asking your questions along the way. Thank you for your great questions, but if you have any clarifying questions in general, and then if we have any public comments, I'm not sure if we do or not. And then after that, coming back so we can be quiet and just kind of listen to your conversation and discussion in any direction you have for us as we talk.
Well, while we're waiting for the board to raise their hands, I'm going to remind the public that if you are joining us on the phone and you would like to speak, to press *9 and it will put you in queue. And if you would like to speak and you are joining us via Zoom video, just hit the raise your hand button and we will take you in the order you received. So are there any other additional board comments or questions? Don't see any. All right, I don't see any public comment either. Just want to give it a minute, just as I reminded everybody about pressing *9 or raising your hand. All right, I do not see any public comment. And back to board discussion. Are there any further board discussion items? Does not look like it. So I want to thank Susie for this thoughtful and thorough. Oh, go ahead, Parveen, you're on mute.
I think, you know, as we talk about our budget, we were hoping that what we present to you really shows you where we spend our money and what it's based on. So if our priorities are shifting, if there are things that we need to do differently, this is the time for us to know that as we start working with schools and with our departments and looking at all of our work to bring you the budget that you get to, you know, consider in January and moving forward. So this is really we're here to listen.
Joe had her hand raised. Joe?
Well, if you read mysteries or murder stories or anything like that, they always tell you follow the money. And that's what you started out with, Susie. And I'm really feeling comfortable and good about what you presented in terms of our priorities and keeping students, our focus on student achievement. And that all means all. So I'm very comfortable that we're doing that. The other piece about this to me is that it's a very good reminder about what we need to advocate for in Sacramento and talk to our legislators about. And plus, you clearly defined the lines of Proposition 98, which is what's important for us to get our funding. And often legislature activity tries to scoop other things into Proposition 98 and say that it's educational funding, where we're looking at it from the school's perspective that it's not. So I think this is a really good blueprint that you've laid out for us for that conversation as well. So I appreciate it. And again, I feel great that we're following the money. I love the fact that we can talk about counselors when I know there aren't counselors in other schools. We can talk about social emotional health, and we can talk about the child nutrition issues. I think they're all really important to have a well-rounded program.
Thank you, Joe. Gary?
Well, I think this was a very clear and comprehensive summary of how the district finances work. We also had a budget sort of meeting about the deferrals a couple of weeks ago. And the one thing that I'm still a little unclear on here is the deferrals mean we're likely to have to borrow a lot of money, and it's going to cost us a lot of money. I remember $350,000 in cost to borrow the money for 1 year. And every year after that we might have to borrow it again if the state doesn't come through. And what I didn't see here though tonight was how that ties back into our budget and where we might need to take action now in order to make that work. I mean, this is a balancing act. It's walking a tightrope between cash flow and the needs in the classrooms and the money that we actually have. And I'm still a little unclear on how those are tied together and whether we might need to make cuts this year, additional cuts, and what implications that might have if you look at our budget, and whether that's a good idea or a bad idea or what might have to go. I don't think we have, at least I personally don't have any good grip on any of that right now. And so while I think this is an excellent presentation, I would really like to extend the discussion. I don't think you guys are prepared to talk about that tonight, I suspect. But I think that's going to have to be a massive part of the ZBB process, and to see where we're going to finally wind up when we get out to June. Not that anybody has any real good idea where we're going to be in June. I mean, we're doing this blindly in addition to that. So that's my concern is I wouldn't want this time now to slip by when we have time, whether that's tonight or whether it's next week, to go over where those things might be. And if we do have to make cuts, what are the priorities on those? My thoughts. Thank you.
Parveen, you're on mute.
That's a really good those are really good, great questions. I think some of them we've talked about, and I think we should, I'm sure Susie's going to jump in and talk about that kind of timeline that we covered when we did the presentation for that. And then when it is that we really come back, the other piece that, like you said, is unknown is the budget in January. We kind of have to assume we're hearing things, but we have to kind of wait for that as well. But I think we do have some of those answers.
And it's also, with the cash flow, Susie, you also said that we won't have to borrow till May, correct?
Yes. So yes. So just to respond to the question about the cash flow. The cash flow for this year, we are able to borrow within ourselves. So it's actually borrowing from other funds, or borrow from ourselves, from other funds. So there, this year, we have other funds that cash is available that we can do a transfer. 2021, that's 2021. So 21, 22, because with the state rolling over basically the deferral, right? It continues the second year, and that is actually when we need to start borrowing, and that is going to be the next fiscal year, not this fiscal year.
And we would include those when we talk about our budget in January, based on what we hear. And then as we get closer to that, we are going to have to come to you. If we have to borrow in May, we're going to come to you, and Susie can talk about the dates for you to actually approve us borrowing. So all of that come into play. I would actually also say one of the things that we heard, if you remember, was that Governor Newsom had said that if there is more, they called it whatever, HEROES Act or whatever, another package from the funding package from the federal government, that's how he would fill some of that gap to stop the deferrals. So we are planning as if there is none of that. We always want to really be very cautious and very conservative, but we already have a plan, and we're going to come to you at different times, and Susie can jump in and talk about when. But we also have to wait to see what happens at the federal level to go there. But it's a long process.
Right. So yeah, in the current year, again, we are not going to ask you for bring back information about the cash deferral or borrowing in the current year, because based on our projection that we are going to be able to borrow from other funds and not an external borrowing. So in the next fiscal year, so in terms of timing, then if we're looking at next fiscal year, we do need to make sure that we have about 90 days to go through the process. And so we will be presenting that to you 90 days before we actually need the funds. So that's in terms of timing. So we're looking at probably, let's just say there's no federal funds to help buy down the deferrals, then we'll be looking at some time in September of next fiscal year to bring to you the information for your consideration. And then the question earlier about the timing in terms of the budget. So Ms. Amadi is correct. We are waiting to hear more about the 21-22 budget. So the 21-22 budget, we always get information, which is, really is next fiscal year, but we get information from the state in January. And so, but what we've been hearing the last couple of months or a couple of weeks is that prepare for a zero COLA, right? So the revenue projection that the state did for this fiscal year, they've actually received a little bit more, and so the revenue is higher than they projected. So that hopefully in the January budget for next year, we are going to see a change in the proposal. What we have in our multi-year projection is a zero funding or zero COLA all the way to the third year. So we did not put in COLA in the second year or the third year because we knew that the likelihood of us getting COLA it's slim, right? So we were very conservative in making sure that our revenue is flat for the next 3 years. And so any changes, obviously, from the January budget will impact those projections. So if it's better, then it's good for us. And if it's not, then we do need to, we will report to you what that looks like in next year and also the third year.
And then therefore that would be when we talk about it's that we also will assume the $350,000 that you were talking about in the future to borrow money. So
yes,
we want to put those things in place, even though they may not happen,
yes,
just to be careful. And I think this is where people get in trouble, is they're like, well, that's down the road. Why do we've always wanted to make sure that in the next 2-3 years, we have all of these things that might happen because of what we have heard. We want to plan for the worst and hope for the best, right? So let's just hope there is actually some relief from the federal government that would help us with the deferrals as well. And then maybe we don't have to borrow at all. Those are all possibilities. And if that's not the case, then we would have to talk about how do we trim our budget as we do ZBB, just like we've done every year. How do we bring things in-house? How do we do save money? How do we go out for grants? What do we cut? But I think it's really important for everybody to hear, hopefully our community to hear, that we don't make decisions haphazardly, and we really focus on all of our goals being aligned with what our mission and vision for our school district is, to support the students as in the best possible way.
Are there any other board comments or questions at this time? With that, I do want to thank Susie for her thorough presentation, for all the comments and questions. And I do want to let our public know that we will need to recess back to closed session. There are a few items that we didn't finish up. So what we will be doing is we will be recessing to closed session, and we'll come back to this exact Zoom once we are finished. So you are more than welcome to stay on the line to wait to hear if we've made any decisions in closed session. But otherwise, I want to thank you for your time and really appreciate you coming to the board workshop on our budget so that you are aware of how we're spending our money within our community.
Yeah, thank you, Shane, for staying and listening.
Well, thank you for giving the
Participating.
presentation, Susie. It was really amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you all. Have a lovely, safe, and good night. And if you would like to stay, we will see you soon. And for the board and staff, I will see you at the closed session meeting. Thank you. Good night. So we are reconvening to open session. Want to let the public know that we did not take any action in closed session. So with that, I want to thank everyone for their time and for coming to the budget workshop tonight. Thank you so much and have a good evening. Bye.